Salve, Teomnes, I am Ruminous, and today we are talking about thematic mechanics in video games. Thematics are how the game connects the story, the mechanics, and the aspects all together into a reasonable or sensible manner. Most developers will strive for immersion, where the player is enveloped in a game and feels like a part of the world. Some define immersion as the player forgetting that they're playing a game, but that really never happens. There'll never be a time where a player forgets that they're actually playing a game, especially when the game tells them for the 20th time to avoid spikes, because humans have a natural avoidance to sharp and pointy things. I don't need to be told that. Thematic mechanics are all about incorporating the story and the setting to how the game actually works. These help the player not feel cheated or annoyed when the player is unable to do certain things as the enemy can, or feel disconnected when the character is able to do things which they normally shouldn't be able to do according to laws of physics, or according to the rest of the game. Thematic mechanics bleed into all other aspects since they are the conduit between the setting and the game. Thematic mechanics can be implemented to explain why the developers failed to introduce aspects into the game, or why the player is special, or why enemies are powerful, and that kind of thing. Thematics include the character being trained in martial arts or part of law enforcement to explain their ability with weapons and firearms, the character being a regular person to explain that they know nothing about surviving in the wilderness and have to learn, the character being related to someone in distress to explain why they are so intent on suffering in a haunted mansion. Thematics can be as simple as a dialogue line or as complex as the core of the story. Thematics are there to help build the world, make everything feel real, and explain the limitations in the game. Silent Hill famously uses a blanket of fog throughout the game which obscures the player's view for more than a few meters or yards. It adds to the creepiness of the horror game, intertwining with the setting, but it also covers up the limitation of the technology which was unable to show much of the world at a single time. Thematics also lend into the whole issue of consistency and reliability. If the game presents an idea as impossible within the setting, but then an NPC or character later on is able to do the impossible, it becomes unclear what is actually impossible. The player may just get slightly annoyed or confused if the thematics are bent without plausible reason, but there are also reasons to bend the rules to keep the final engagement, as games are meant to be entertainment.
Fireball Spam asks, since a single zombie bite is fatal in movies, did Kamiya-san ever consider a one-hit kill difficulty setting?
Developers need to consider the actual fun of the game and also don't have years to scrutinize every little detail for thematic accuracy. Not every inconsistency between the gameplay and the story needs to be explained if the answer is because it wouldn't be fun otherwise.
Kamiya-san would want players to enjoy the game and try to go for no damage clears on their own.
The suspension of disbelief extends to all fiction, including games, and it is why the immersion, where people forget about the game being a game, is absolute screeching pelicans. To keep the thematics consistent, the developers should develop the setting and rules of the game first, then keep to them as they add new mechanics and aspects to the game. It's fine if the rules are bent or if there are exceptions, especially with foreshadowing, but showing something in a cutscene and then not being able to do anything close to it really hampers the cinematic effect of the game. Getting a little slow there, huh, buddy? Thematics are sometimes contradicted or ignored at various points, and these tend to have a much more drastic effect on the player. These overtly contradict preconceived rules or basic understanding without any proper explanation, which can be a cheap trick to force something into a game if not written in properly. They can, however, be a wonderful method of introducing a detrimental mechanic to make the game more challenging or different than before if they are properly written to match the scene, character, setting, or something along those lines. You know, some of these games I did plan to play afterwards. I may not do videos on all of them, but I plan to play them. But that requires me actually able to play them. I can't play this game. It's like 9 minutes of cutscenes. It did the Kingdom Hearts thing, where I stopped the cutscene, I was able to walk for 2 seconds and ended a new cutscene. And it's look at these jump cuts. You don't want your intro or your tutorial to be this obnoxious for this reason. I can't skip this thing, and more importantly, it's eating up way too much of my time about things that I don't even care about. Oh my god, I can finally play again. I'm sure it's gonna end very shortly. It ended very shortly. The Shenmue series typically has missions which require the player to talk to NPCs at certain parts of the day, otherwise the mission can't start. The game has no method of speeding up time, so the player will often have to sit the game down for a while until the game's time is ready for the mission. Early in the game, the player can roam around and do other missions and tasks, but there are times where the only quests left are those locked by the time constraints, and all other NPCs will be busy, standing in the street apparently having an existential crisis, which gives the player some empty time to also have an existential existential crisis. The tasks and missions locked to certain timeframes definitely brought bile at the unnecessary requirement. The result is that it turns some players away or detracts players from multiple playthroughs because they don't want to suffer it again. As with other mechanics, they are so intertwined and so heavy and so varied that they're often done well and poorly in a game at various points, and it's hard to find a polished game that is mostly one or the other. I will give games with a good and bad example of implementing thematic mechanics, then explain why they either work or fail and how they impact the overall experience. Life is Strange is a walking simulator / choice game where the player can reverse time, but only for a limited amount before the character suffers severe issues. This sets the precedent that the character only has a limited amount of rewind juice before needing to calm down and recover. The choices in this game are directly told to have an effect later on, and major scenes will have a time freeze and funky trip to let you know that things just got real. Although this could be held forever, it is a slight inconsistency to benefit the player, although it's easily explained with simple theories and just paying attention to the world around you. During certain cutscenes, it's shown that the character loses her power due to overuse and suffers fatigue, but the player then can use the power repeatedly throughout the normal sequences without consequence to the character. Again, a slight inconsistency, but it could be easily programmed into the game to lock the power if overused beyond the reasonable amount to not limit the player, but to show that the power has a negative effect, which it only really does in cutscenes, not in actual gameplay. There are also times in the later game where the character notes to reserve her power when possible and to be more careful, but then the player still demanded to use the power extensively, even when it's clear that activating the washer will drop everything off top of it. Even if the player is careful and forward-thinking, they cannot prevent many of these issues that require rewinding, despite looking for reasonable alternatives or if they know what will happen afterwards. This, however, is odd and sometimes clunky, but ultimately does not ruin the experience, as the game is all about choices and affecting the people around you, not about being the most perfect person who never spills anything. Sundered, on the other hand, is a great example of tying every mechanic and action to its story and setting. The action-adventure game starts out with a regular human wandering in the desert until she finds some ruins and gets grabbed by some ancient deity thing. The player starts with a bar for stamina and one for health, with actions for jumping and dodging. The character is able to slide along walls and wall jump and endure massive falls without damage, which are a few examples of the superhuman abilities not explained by the story, but again, sometimes games tend to excuse a thing here and there for fun. These could have been talents learned earlier in life, as we know so little about the character, so it's partly excused for the game, partly explainable by the player's own theories. When the player finally meets the deity, it acts as a weapon and guide through the enigmatic realm. All upgrades are made through the deity, and all new abilities are gained from the technology of those long dead before the character's arrival. The settings, enemies, and NPCs are explained by being influenced by the ancient gods. The actions and mechanics are incorporated by ancient technology, which even the deity did not understand. The upgrades are channeled through the deity, and this allows the player to improve their equipment with the divine energy, but not through the skill tree, although there are a few times where the cannon can be upgraded for some reason. The upgrades are permanent, as the deity remarks at various points that the character can only escape through him, and that the character will receive immortality from him. If the player chooses to allow the deity to corrupt the character will become more menacing, intimidating, lethal, proving the words of the deity true. Nearly all aspects of the game are explained by the setting, either by extra information that the player can find, or by the deity itself. Thematic mechanics, like the story and music, can help the gameplay all the better by giving a purpose or a reason or a rationale for the events that are happening. Why can an NPC or boss enemy do things which the character can't? Why is the character able to rampage in cutscenes, but in actual gameplay is a wet noodle? Explaining the fantastical elements of the story with gameplay aspects can help with immersion or engagement and make the story all the more intriguing. You do want some room for interpretation and lenience so that people will theorize and discuss the game, but also there is a reason sometimes that it's just a game. Not everything needs an answer. Not every element needs a reasonable and realistic answer to everything that's happening, but a game whose story is explained and consistent in the gameplay aspects and in the setting or design will mitigate any issues with the gameplay and help with retention. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified of future videos. If you have any constructive criticism of things that you think that I missed, got wrong, or that you want to add on to, or games that have good, bad, or unique thematics, please put them in the comment section below so that we can continue this discourse. But until next time, where we talk about the UI and UX, wale te omnes.